Hi everyone, welcome to week 2 of Lit 215 for the spring 2022 semester. So this week we're going to do some more work with the borders theme that we started in week 1 and also work on your first major assignment, which is the thought paper. So let's go ahead and get started with the info for week 2. So I wanted to just give you an overview of the assignments due this week. So we will have a second reading reflection. I'm actually going to bump this up a little bit because I think having the reflection and the discussion board due back to back is kind of a little much, and to also encourage you all to start the readings early in the week. I'd like the reading reflection this week to be due Wednesday. Then you'll have a discussion board due Friday. Make sure you respond to others in our discussion by Sunday, and then your thought paper is going to be due Sunday as well. And I think we're going to keep this kind of schedule going forward. So every week your reflection will be due Wednesday, discussion board Friday, major assignment Sunday. And we will, for the rest of our course, since this is only 8 weeks, we will have a major assignment each Sunday. So you want to kind of just prepare yourself for that and kind of get comfortable with that scheduling format. Of course, if you kind of need to work something out individually, please shoot me an email. I can be pretty flexible, but if necessary, if you've got extenuating circumstances, but otherwise these due dates will stay pretty firm. So also what I wanted to do is kind of give you all a bit of a disclaimer for our course. This is something I meant to put in our syllabus and I wanted to just reiterate here, but I'm just going to read this disclaimer. So our classroom and our course provides an open space for the critical and civil exchange of ideas. Some readings and other content in this course will include topics that some students may find offensive and or traumatizing. I'll aim to forewarn students about potentially disturbing content, and I ask all students to help to create an atmosphere of mutual respect and sensitivity. So I wanted to make this disclaimer before we start discussions this week, especially because we're going to encounter some sensitive language in the readings for this week, and I just want everyone to be aware of that before you start. So this disclaimer is not meant to say that you're going to have undue difficulty with the content of the course, but it just means that I want everyone to be aware that there are some topics and some language that is sensitive and that we should be sensitive to. So I want to really emphasize that I want to create a respectful atmosphere in our course, particularly in our discussion board and in our major project. So be aware that language that other students use may not be language appropriate for you, or if you use language in our discussions or in our course that is, inappropriate to someone else, I would like to address that with sensitivity and also with a mutual respect for all of us here. So the reason I wanted to bring this up was because you'll notice in the list of readings for this week, we've got in response to Executive Order 9066. There's also a video related to that. Notes from a Fragmented Daughter. The third reading is Mommy, What Does the N-Word Mean? And I have the title given here with the N-word spelled out because that's how the author intended it. But as a young white female, I do not have the space to use the N-word. And that's something that I recognize and that I respect. But there are others in our course and students here that word is part of their dialect, and I fully respect that. And it's part of the author's dialect, which is also why I respect it. But I wanted to make it clear that that does not mean that I think that that everyone should use language with abandon. So just be sensitive to that. But I wanted to make it clear as to why I'm using the full spelled out version, because that's what the author intended. And in the same way that we don't want to shy away from certain people using their linguistic dialects, we also want to recognize that those dialects don't apply to everyone. All right. We've also got a story called Different Cultural Levels Eat Here, and then one called Doors. So the first 3 pieces are pretty short. Different Cultural Levels and Doors are a little longer, but they all sort of deal with this idea of borders. Last week, we started to talk about the idea that obviously America is made up of a variety of different groups, and whether you want to think of America as a quilt or a mosaic or the melting pot metaphor has really kind of gone out the window a bit, but we have these sort of distinct subsets of groups either, racial, social, cultural, economic even, that create borders between one group and another, and that also create borders within groups themselves. And this is something we kind of examined in our discussion board last week. This week, what I want to do is discuss that in more depth, but in terms of linguistics. So each of these stories talks about either physical borders or primarily linguistic ones. So this is the topic of our discussion board, and also just something I want us all to think about, because I am a linguist actually by education, and I think that language is incredibly important and fascinating and plays a huge role in how we perceive other people and how our cultures are built. So just keep that sensitivity to language in mind and be respectful, be open, but be sensitive as well. So questions to kind of ask yourself. Oh, sorry, I skipped ahead of myself. The other thing I wanted to kind of bring up for the readings this week. So the response to the executive order and thoughts of a fragmented daughter are both from the perspective of a Japanese American, and both relate to World War II and a point in American history that was incredibly insensitive to Japanese Americans specifically. And this is something I found that some students haven't learned about yet, either in a history course or in school, so I wanted to sort of highlight it. So the term Japanese internment relates to a forceful removal and incarceration of Americans of Japanese descent during World War II. So this was primarily between 1942 and 1945. It was established by President Roosevelt in response to Pearl Harbor. So the idea was there just was an incredible fear about Japanese Americans, and that something like Pearl Harbor would happen again on the mainland, and that the way to avoid that was by throwing 120,000 people into prison camps. And it was fast, it was widespread, and it lasted 4 years. The last camp closed in 1946, but the act, the sort of presidential power to incarcerate Japanese Americans was not repealed until 1976. So I posted also a video this week called Ugly History that discusses this in more depth. And I think that Japanese internment is absolutely an ugly piece of American history, but an important one. So if you're new to this concept or haven't really learned about this before, I really encourage you to do some research on it and to kind of educate yourself about this event and the aftermath of it. Something that you might also think about is there was a big increase in hate crimes against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the U.S. After COVID began, because, in some communities, COVID was characterized as a Chinese virus or something that was related to being Asian American. And so I think that although, Japanese internment happened a long time ago, long-ish, the ideas behind it are still very real. So just something to think about. Other questions to consider this week. How does language both unite and separate us? Because linguistically, English is the main accepted language in the US, but even within that main language, we have hundreds of dialects of English and distinctions between what we say and how that defines who we are. Then what's it like to live as an immigrant in the US? And how does this experience change with time? So in the readings, you will see some reference to being a child of immigrants or also being part of an immigrant family. So I want us to think about this week especially, what does it mean for America to be a nation of immigrants? Do you agree with that perspective? And finally, based on all of these readings that relate to sort of borders within the US, how does this influence our thoughts about literature? And in the literature you've experienced before, who was included and then who was left out? That, I think, is a clear border in our society in what gets written down and what gets repeated. So it's really interesting stuff happening this week. I'm excited to see how you all tackle these questions and to read your thoughts both in the reading reflection and our discussion board. So remember, be respectful, be sensitive, but also be honest, and we will agree to do the same. So the other thing I want to talk about is your major assignment for this week. So the thought paper is 2 to 3 pages responding to one of the prompts. These are copied from the assignment sheet. I won't read them to you because you can read, but there are 4 options. The first one just asks what means to be American. The second, responding to a quote from Octavia Spencer. The third talks about victimization in multicultural literature. And then the fourth talks about how you might define culture for yourself. So any of these are great options. They do sort of necessitate a little bit of planning. So I think that if you've taken like English 101 or 102, you know, the idea of writing down your ideas before you start, having a clear thesis, supporting it with examples either from your experience or from our readings, that all still applies here. I am an English instructor, so I teach those courses as well, but I'm primarily interested in your thoughts. All right, so as long as you have an argument and you support it, and you're bringing in examples from your experience, then you are golden. All right, so this paper is really just an opportunity for you to dig a little deeper into some of the themes of our course. And then what we're actually going to do in week 8 as part of your reflection for the class, you're going to revisit this paper and see if some of your thoughts from the beginning have changed. So it'll be a little 2-part, but for right now, choose a prompt and then submit 2 pages in MLA format on your answer. So the grading criteria is on the assignment sheet. It includes just answering a prompt, having a thesis, using examples, length. Don't include any academic research, but you can include our course readings if you want. Make sure that you edit for Standard American English, another reference to linguistic differences. Feel free to discuss that in our discussion board as well. And then make sure you follow MLA format. I will post a template that you can use for the essay if MLA format is new to you. All right, so that's our major assignment for this week. I am really excited to see how we do, and please shoot me an email if you have any questions.